All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on Jürgen Habermas.
Oh, a big one.
Yeah, a huge name in post-World War II social thought philosophy.
Absolutely.
He's German, but his influence, I mean, you see it all across Europe and the U.S.
Oh, yeah,
And he was really important in how German political culture, became more liberal.
for sure.
A lot of people call him like a second-generation Frankfurt School guy, but he's
Wow.
got way more influences than that. It's a bit more complicated than just that one label.
Absolutely. You can't just put them in a box like that.
No, not at all. So for people listening, you're interested in these philosophical concepts and how they play out in society.
Right.
Think of this as a really focused look at Habermas's, his core contributions.
We're going to really try to distill it down to what's essential.
Exactly. We've been going through the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on him.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's a beast.
Yeah.
But we want to try to give you the key takeaways so you really understand what he was all about.
And why he matters. Yeah.
Why he still matters. Yeah. And man, he wrote about so much stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, from like fundamental social theory
All right. Yeah.
to like the really nitty gritty of discourse ethics
Yeah.
and how law and democracy actually work.
And his theory of law and democracy is really something else.
Yeah. And he wasn't just an academic, stuck in the ivory tower.
No, not at all.
He was a public intellectual, like weighing in on big debates, German reunification, the role of religion in modern society.
Huge debates.
Oh, yeah. Big stuff.
It's also important, I think, to consider a couple moments early in his career
Okay.
that really show how complex his intellectual journey was, especially within the context of German history.
Yeah.
So in 1953, there's this interesting episode. He critiques Heidegger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for Heidegger's remarks about the Nazi era. Heidegger was, well, pretty unrepentant. And then later, during the student protests in '68, Habermas makes this comment about left-wing fascism.
Oh, wow.
It caused a lot of controversy.
Yeah, I bet.
So these events, they weren't just like little side notes.
Yeah.
They really show you his relationship with German intellectual history and the political landscape at the time. It was nuanced, sometimes tense,
Yeah.
really fascinating.
It's interesting, too, how his academic career kind of maps out these developments in his thinking.
Oh, totally.
So he starts off succeeding Horkheimer at Frankfurt.
Right.
Then he goes to the Max Planck Institute, really productive time for him there.
Yeah.
Writes The Theory of Communicative Action, huge book.
Massive.
Then back to Frankfurt for the rest of his career.
Until he retired, yeah.
Each one of those periods is marked by these big shifts in his thinking.
You can really see it.
Yeah. Okay, so to get us started, let's dive into one of his most famous ideas, something he's really known for, the public sphere.
Okay.
Where does this come from?
Well, the concept really comes from his book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere.
Published in
1962.
Okay.
And for Habermas,
Mhm.
the public sphere is like this realm, right?
Yeah.
Existing outside the state, the economy, even the family. It's where individuals get together to discuss things that matter to everyone.
Like issues of common concern.
Exactly.
Okay.
He calls it the public use of reason. And it's how public opinion gets shaped through, through rational debate.
So it's not just people shouting at each other.
No. Ideally, there's a process of reasoned argumentation.
Right. And this whole idea of the public sphere, it didn't just appear out of nowhere, right?
No, definitely not.
He traces it back historically.
Habermas loves his historical analysis.
Yeah, he does. So he talks about this contrast between what he calls the representative public sphere of the Middle Ages,
Okay.
where power was more about display than actual debate.
Right.
And then you have the emergence of this new public sphere in the 17th, 18th centuries.
The bourgeois public sphere.
Right, the bourgeois public sphere. And it starts in these interesting places. Coffee houses, salons.
Yeah.
It's like a literary public sphere at first.
Oh, totally.
People are discussing like novels, literature.
Habermas even talks about Samuel Richardson's Pamela.
Oh, Pamela, okay.
People were really debating that book.
Interesting.
And so the skills people developed in these literary discussions, the critical reasoning, it starts to get applied to politics.
Okay.
Public affairs. People start using the same tools to analyze what's happening in government.
Makes sense.
And this is all happening alongside some big shifts in society.
Yeah.
You've got the rise of the modern state, right?
Yeah.
It's becoming more bureaucratic, less about individual rulers.
Right.
And then there's mercantile capitalism growing rapidly. People need information about markets, government policies.
Yeah.
So you see these news sheets popping up covering commodity prices, state actions.
Wow.
It's like this perfect storm for a critical public sphere to emerge.
So are you saying this bourgeois public sphere was like the perfect ideal?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
Habermas he's clear about its limitations.
Yeah.
It was mostly educated men, property owners, bourgeoisie.
Right.
A lot of people were excluded.
Yeah.
Critics have pointed out that, workers,
Or
women,
especially women.
yeah, they were largely left out of the picture.
Right. And this is where his methodology comes in.
Oh, yeah.
He uses this thing called historical reconstruction
Right.
to critique the public spheres we see today.
Kind of like holding a mirror up to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So he creates this ideal type, this theoretical model of the bourgeois public sphere,
Okay.
and uses that to analyze and, sometimes criticize the ways public spheres actually function in modern democracies.
Right.
It's like a benchmark for comparison.
Interesting.
And then, of course, he talks about the structural transformation of the public sphere, especially in the mid-20th century.
Yeah. What's going on there?
Well, Habermas argues that the lines between state and society get blurry.
How so?
You've got the rise of what he calls welfare state mass democracy.
Okay.
Governments are getting more involved in the economy, expanding social programs.
Yeah.
At the same time, you have these non-state actors getting more powerful.
Like.
Corporations, big political parties.
Right, right.
All this leads to what Habermas calls refeudalization.
Refeudalization.
Like a breakdown, or at least an erosion, of that critical public sphere.
Okay.
The space for genuine debate shrinks.
Got it.
And, it's worth noting that his thinking on the public sphere actually evolved over time.
Really?
Yeah, at first he was very focused on, like, a single unified public sphere within a nation.
Okay.
But influenced by thinkers like Nancy Fraser,
Okay.
he started recognizing that there are multiple public spheres.
Like overlapping?
Yeah, overlapping, intersecting. He calls them subaltern counterpublics.
Subaltern counterpublics. Wow.
Each one focuses on different communities, issues. But the boundaries are fluid, so there's communication between them.
That's fascinating.
It's complex.
Yeah.
But within all this, the political public sphere is the closest we have to something universal.
Okay.
It's focused on the political system itself, as a whole.
Right.
Habermas describes it as like a sounding board for societal problems
Uh-huh.
and a filter bed that ideally filters out contributions to highlight what's in everyone's interest.
Okay.
And this is really crucial for forming what he calls communicative power.
Communicative power. We'll have to get to that.
We will. It's a big one. But yeah, this process of public discourse is how you get reflexive public opinion, a public that can critically reflect on itself.
Right.
He also makes this distinction within the political public sphere itself.
Okay.
There's the formal sphere,
Mm.
think like elected officials, courts, parliaments, all very regulated.
Yeah.
And then there's the informal sphere. That's everything happening outside those official channels.
Oh.
More fluid, less regulated.
Got it.
Habermas stresses that you need feedback between these two.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's how the political system stays legitimate.
Keeps things in check.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this idea of the public sphere, how it forms, how it transforms.
Right.
But what about, like, across national borders? Does that
Right.
work?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And Habermas does actually consider, the possibility of transnational public spheres.
Okay.
With globalization, our world's getting more and more interconnected.
Right.
And he points to things like the Vietnam War, the Iraq War.
Okay.
These events, they created these moments of global attention,
Yeah.
like a temporary transnational public sphere.
Interesting.
And when it comes to things like the EU, these transnational political entities,
Right.
for them to be legitimate, Habermas argues,
Yeah.
you need the public spheres of the member states to actually function together.
Like as a European public sphere.
Exactly.
Wow. So this idea of the public sphere, it's not just some theoretical concept.
No.
It has real implications for how we understand politics, communication, globalization.
It's still very relevant today.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit.
Oh,
Let's look at some of his earlier works.
All right.
Specifically from, let's say, 1964 to 71.
Okay.
There's this key text from this period, Knowledge and Human Interests.
Oh, yeah. Knowledge and human interests. Big one.
What's the core argument he's making in that book?
So in Knowledge and Human Interests, Habermas is tracing what he sees as like the prehistory of positivism and scientism.
Okay.
And he argues that the way modern thought has developed, it's been marked by a decline of self-reflection
Self-reflection within
within Wissenschaft.
Wissenschaft.
Yeah, it's this German term, means all forms of systematic and creative scholarship.
So both natural and social sciences.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he's especially concerned with what's called Erkenntniskritik.
Erkenntniskritik.
It's basically the tradition of critical philosophy, from Kant through German idealism all the way to Marx.
Okay.
And they were all focused on critically examining, like, the conditions for knowledge itself.
How we know what we know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Habermas thinks this tradition has been overshadowed by these positivistic approaches.
In both the sciences.
Yeah, natural and social.
Interesting.
And his central thesis, he puts it pretty bluntly.
Okay.
He says that we disavow reflection is positivism.
Wow.
So for Habermas, the real problem with positivism is this lack of critical self-awareness. Like,
Right.
we're so focused on getting knowledge, we forget to ask ourselves, well, what are we doing? What are the underlying assumptions we're bringing to the table?
And he draws on this concept from Lukács, right? Reification.
Oh, yeah. He loves Lukács.
How does that fit in here?
Well, Lukács had this idea that social constructs can start to seem natural, like they're just part of the world independent of us.
Okay.
And Habermas is saying that this naturalness, it's a historical development. And crucially, it's something we can overcome through critical reflection.
We can break free from it.
Exactly. He's echoing Horkheimer and Adorno here.
Oh, right.
They said, all reification is a forgetting.
Hmm.
So for Habermas, positivism and historicism, they just take this contemplative stance towards things.
Okay.
They don't recognize that science, knowledge, it's all driven by human
That's
interests.
human interests, yeah.
Interests rooted in our natural history as a species.
That's a really interesting point.
And they try to hide the active role of the subject, the person doing the knowing. And they ignore the social and historical conditions that actually shape what we consider knowledge.
Right. It's not all objective and neutral.
Not at all.
And these human interests, he actually identifies 3 specific types.
Yeah, he calls them knowledge constitutive interests.
Knowledge constitutive interests.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. But it's important.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the whole basis for his critique of knowledge.
Okay, so what are they?
So first you've got the technical interest.
Okay.
This drives the empirical analytic sciences, all about control, prediction, manipulating the natural world.
Okay.
Then you have the practical interest. This one guides the historical hermeneutical sciences,
Okay.
all about understanding, interpretation, figuring out the meaning of things, how we fit into our social world.
Okay.
And then finally, there's the emancipatory interest.
The emancipatory interest. This is the big one.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
This interest is tied to critical self-reflection. It's the drive to achieve Mündigkeit.
Mündigkeit.
It's a complex term, but you can think of it as autonomy, responsibility, self-determination.
Oh.
Really about becoming free in the fullest sense.
So not just free from external constraints, but like free to determine our own lives.
Exactly.
Wow. And Habermas is trying to bring this back into Marxist thought, right?
Yeah, he feels like Marxism had lost its way a bit, become too positivistic, too focused on these objective laws of history. So he's trying to reconnect it with this emancipatory drive.
That's really fascinating.
For Habermas, understanding these different interests, it's essential for any kind of critical assessment of knowledge.
Okay.
We have to ask, what interests are driving this research? What are its implications for society? Who benefits?
Yeah, that's a crucial question.
It can't just be about, accumulating knowledge for its own sake.
Right, right. We should also touch on his essay, Technology and Science as Ideology,
Okay.
and some of the arguments he makes in theory and practice.
Right.
These are both from this early period.
Yeah.
What was he getting at there?
Well, in those works, Habermas is critiquing this tendency in modern society to reduce everything to technical problems.
Okay.
Like, we try to solve social and political issues through social engineering.
Social engineering.
Yeah, just applying technical solutions without really thinking about, the deeper questions.
The why questions.
Exactly. Like, how should we live? What's the good life?
Right, right.
And he argues that capitalist societies, they're obsessed with economic growth.
Yeah.
It becomes the ultimate goal, no questions asked.
Okay.
And this leads to the dominance of what he calls instrumental reason.
Instrumental reason.
Yeah, we focus on the most efficient means to achieve these predetermined ends, but we don't question the ends themselves.
So we forget about the good life part.
Exactly.
Mm.
And science and technology in this context, they get detached from, any ethical or political considerations.
Okay.
They're just absorbed into the economic and administrative systems used as tools for control and expansion.
I see. So it's like the means justify the ends, but the ends themselves are never really scrutinized.
Exactly. And this leads to a depoliticization of the average citizen.
Okay.
We're no longer seen as participants, but as like consumers or just objects to be managed.
Wow, that's a bleak.
It can be.
Oh.
But Habermas was hoping that maybe student movements, with their protests against this reduction of life to mere economic gain, could be a force for change.
Yeah.
He saw them as like potentially reconnecting these technocratic systems with the real questions of meaning and value.
Okay, so we've seen his critique of positivism, this concern with instrumental reason, and the depoliticization of society.
Right.
How does his thinking evolve from there?
Well, his work from, let's say, 1971 to 82, this is kind of a transitional period.
Okay.
This is where he develops what he calls the communicative paradigm.
Okay.
And key work from this period is legitimation crisis.
The legitimation crisis. Okay.
Yeah. And in this book, he's really starting to rethink some of his core assumptions.
Yeah.
There's a big shift. He starts by looking at traditional Marxist theory, but he's not totally buying it.
Okay.
So Marxists, they predicted that capitalist crises would come from, the contradictions within capitalism itself.
Right.
Like worker exploitation, class struggle.
Yeah.
But Habermas thinks those have been, kind of mitigated by the welfare state.
Okay.
And capitalism has figured out how to keep growing, at least for now. So he argues that crises in late capitalism, they're more likely to come from what he calls legitimation deficits.
Legitimation deficits.
Yeah, it's all about the state intervening in the economy.
Okay, so how did that work?
Well, as the state gets more involved in managing the economy, providing social services,
Right.
it needs to justify those actions to its citizens.
Yes, that makes sense.
It needs legitimacy. And if it can't provide good reasons, if its actions seem arbitrary or unfair,
Yeah.
you get a crisis. People stop trusting the system.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to see how this ties into his ideas about communication and reason.
Exactly. For Habermas, the philosophical question becomes, how do you legitimize these state interventions?
Yeah.
How do you get people to accept them? And he proposes that the answer lies in discursive justification.
Discursive justification. So it's not about force or coercion, but about reason and persuasion.
Exactly. It's about having open public debates where policies are based on good reasons, reasons that reflect everyone's interest. Or, if you can't get everyone to agree, you at least need some kind of compromise based on mutual understanding.
Right. So this is a pretty big philosophical shift for Habermas, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He's moving away from this focus on the material base, the economic structures,
Yeah.
and towards the realm of communication norms and how we justify our actions to each other.
And during this period, he also publishes Zur Rekonstruktion des historischen Materialismus.
Right.
What's he arguing in that book?
So in that work, he's taking on another core Marxist idea.
Okay.
This idea that how we produce things, the material mode of production,
Yeah.
that's what determines how society is structured, how people relate to each other, even how they think.
Okay.
But Habermas isn't convinced. He says, no, there's also this developmental logic of normative structures.
Normative structures, like our values, our ideas about right and wrong.
Exactly. And he sees these structures as developing independently of material production.
Wow.
He compares it to Kohlberg's stages of moral development.
Okay.
So as societies evolve, so do their moral and ethical frameworks.
Interesting.
And this has implications for how we think about social change.
In what way?
Well, for Marxists, social change is all about class struggle, right?
Yeah.
The proletariat overthrowing the bourgeoisie.
Okay.
But Habermas is saying, no, it's not just about economics.
Okay.
It's also about the evolution of our moral understanding, our capacity for reason and communication.
That's a really interesting and, I imagine, controversial idea.
Oh, yeah. A lot of Marxists at the time were pretty critical.
They probably saw it as like a betrayal of Marxism.
Exactly. They thought he was abandoning core principles.
Okay.
And some even accused him of, getting too cozy with systems theory.
Systems theory, like the work of Nicholas Luhmann.
Yeah, Luhmann.
Mm.
But Habermas is careful to distinguish himself from Luhmann.
In what way?
Well, Luhmann had this idea that legitimacy is just about accepting decisions. even if you don't agree with them,
Okay.
just going along with it. Habermas rejects that.
Yeah.
He still thinks rational justification is crucial.
Even within these complex modern societies.
Exactly. And even with these big shifts in his thinking, he's still concerned with, the problems of capitalism.
Okay.
He still wants to understand and potentially overcome its inherent contradictions.
But it's not just about economics anymore.
No, it's about communication, rationality, the legitimacy of our institutions.
Right. So this brings us to his most important work, what many consider his masterpiece, the theory of communicative action.
Yeah, that's the big one.
This is where all these ideas come together.
This is where he really lays out his mature social theory.
And it's a huge book.
Oh, yeah, it's dense.
So what are the key philosophical components of this work?
All right, so the theory of communicative action is basically Habermas's attempt to provide a comprehensive framework for understanding how society works.
Okay.
And it's got all these different pieces. It's got a theory of meaning, a theory of social action, a social ontology.
Social ontology.
That's just a fancy way of saying, like, a theory of what society is made of, its basic building blocks.
Okay.
And then it's also got a critical theory element where he diagnoses the problems of modern society.
So it's a pretty ambitious project.
Oh, hugely ambitious.
Okay, let's break it down a bit. Starting with his theory of meaning.
Okay.
Now, I know he draws on some pretty influential figures in the philosophy of language here.
Oh, yeah. He's not shy about bringing in other thinkers.
Who are some of the key influences?
So first you've got Karl Buehler.
Buehler, okay.
He had this model of language called the organon model.
Okay.
And it emphasizes that language isn't just about representing things. It's also about expressing yourself and appealing to others.
Okay.
Then you have speech act theory.
Speech act theory, right, like Austin and Searle.
Exactly. They were saying that when we speak, we're not just describing the world, we're actually doing things.
Doing things with words.
Yeah, like making promises, giving orders, asking questions.
Yeah.
And finally, he draws on what he calls formal semantics.
Formal semantics.
It's a branch of philosophy that analyzes, like, the logical structure of language.
Okay.
And he's particularly interested in Michael Dummett's work.
Okay.
Dummett was a big critic of traditional theories of meaning.
Okay.
He said, it's not enough to just know what a sentence corresponds to in the world. You also have to know how we verify its truth, how we justify it.
Interesting. So how does Habermas weave all these different ideas together into his own theory?
Well, he calls it formal pragmatics.
Formal pragmatics.
It's a mouthful, but the basic idea is this.
Yeah.
We understand the meaning of something someone says, not just by its content, but by understanding why they said it, what their reasons are.
Okay.
So it's about looking at the context of the utterance, the speaker's intentions, the social norms that are in play.
So it's not just what's said, but how it's said and why it's said.
Exactly.
And Buehler's model, how does that fit in?
It's actually really important. It provides this basic structure for how Habermas thinks about communication.
Okay.
So Buehler said that language has these three functions: cognitive, expressive, and appeal.
Right.
And for Habermas, these map onto the three fundamental validity claims that we make whenever we communicate.
Validity claims.
Yeah, like when I say something, I'm implicitly claiming that it's true.
Okay.
That's a truth claim.
Right.
I'm also claiming that it's right or appropriate to say it in this context.
Okay.
That's a rightness claim.
Right.
And I'm claiming that I'm being sincere, that I actually believe what I'm saying.
Okay. That's the sincerity claim.
Exactly. And these validity claims, they correspond to three different worlds that we relate to.
Three worlds.
Yeah, like the objective world of facts, the social world of norms and values, and then the subjective world of my own internal experiences.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But the basic point is that communication, it's not just about conveying information.
No, it's about coordinating our actions, making commitments, building shared understandings.
And this all ties back to this idea of reaching understanding, right?
Exactly. Verständigung, as he calls it.
Understanding, yeah.
It's absolutely central to his whole theory.
Okay.
He says that the very purpose of language, like the reason it evolved, is to help us reach agreement.
Wow.
He even says that reaching understanding is the inherent telos of human speech.
Telos.
Yeah, like its ultimate aim, its built-in purpose.
Okay.
And this idea of reaching understanding, it's not just about understanding the words someone is saying.
No.
It's about recognizing the validity claims they're making accepting their reasons, and potentially reaching a consensus.
So it's a much deeper level of understanding.
Yeah, it's not just about comprehension, it's about potential agreement, about
Yeah.
coordinating our actions based on shared reasons.
Hmm. Now, I imagine there are some philosophers who would take issue with this whole idea of formal pragmatics and the inherent telos of language being reaching understanding.
Oh, for sure. Like Stephen Heath, he has some pretty strong objections.
What are some of his criticisms?
Well, one of Heath's critiques is that Habermas relies too heavily on this idea from Dummett about knowing the conditions under which a sentence is assertable.
Okay.
But Heath argues that this idea is really tied to the semantics of language, like the literal meanings.